Okay, so imagine this. You're 9 months pregnant and anxiously awaiting the arrival of your little one.
Okay.
And suddenly you find yourself plunging 30 feet down a well into rushing sewage.
Oh, wow.
That's just a fraction of what Maria Vrachvila faced after a terrifying encounter with a serial killer known as the chessboard killer.
Yeah.
We're going to unpack that story and another incredible tale of survival today, all while getting a behind-the-scenes look at the wildly popular true crime podcast, My Favorite Murder.
It's really interesting how My Favorite Murder blends lighthearted humor and chilling true crime.
Right.
And it speaks to our fascination with the darker side of human nature.
Exactly.
And, of course, the psychology of survival.
And what's so interesting about My Favorite Murder is that it's grown into this massive community of murderinos.
Right.
But it had really humble beginnings.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking recording in Karen's apartment,
Yeah.
getting their first fan-made gifts.
Yeah.
It's a real testament to how powerful organic growth can be.
It really is.
Yeah.
And the term murderino itself is a great example of that. It wasn't something the hosts Karen and Georgia came up with.
Right.
It was coined by a listener, which speaks volumes about the sense of belonging and shared fascination that draws people to true crime.
And that shared fascination often stems from the question, could I survive that?
Absolutely.
Which brings us to the two incredible survivor stories we're diving into today. First up is Maria Vrachvila and her chilling encounter with Alexander Pichushkin, the chessboard killer. What drove this guy?
Well, Pichushkin had this truly morbid goal to kill one person for each square on a chessboard.
Wow.
He mainly targeted elderly homeless men in Bitsa Park in Moscow, luring them with the promise of vodka at his dog's grave.
Hold on his dog's grave. It's almost a contradiction. An animal lover who's also a serial killer.
It is a bizarre juxtaposition, but that was part of his manipulation. He'd create this sense of camaraderie, this shared grief, and then when they were vulnerable, he'd attack them with a hammer. And this is where it gets even more disturbing. He'd then push a vodka bottle into their skull wounds.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
It's hard to even fathom the level of cruelty. But thankfully, Maria, who was 19 and 3 months pregnant at the time, didn't fit his typical victim profile. How did she end up crossing paths with this monster?
It was a chance encounter. Maria knew Pichushkin through her boyfriend, who was his friend. After an argument with her boyfriend, she was hanging out near the metro station, feeling upset. Pichushkin saw her, and already looking for his next victim, seized the opportunity.
So it was a crime of opportunity, this poor woman in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah.
What happened next?
He lured her to a secluded area of Bitsa Park, pretending he had some contraband cameras to show her. They got to a well, and he asked her to look inside.
You know, a well is never a good sign in a true crime story.
Right. And as Maria leaned over, Pichushkin shoved her in. She desperately tried to cling to the edge, but he grabbed her hair and started smashing her head against the concrete.
He sounds incredibly sadistic. I can't imagine the terror she must have felt pregnant and facing this kind of violence.
Maria later said she knew he wouldn't stop, so she made a split-second decision to let go, choosing to fall 30 feet into the unknown over certain death at his hands.
Wow. In that moment of absolute terror, she found a way to fight for her survival. What happened after the fall?
She landed in a narrow sewage pipe with rushing water and had to fight to keep from being swept away. It's hard to grasp the strength and willpower it must have taken to survive, injured, pregnant, surrounded by sewage.
It sounds unimaginable. But she did find a way out, didn't she?
She did. After hours of struggling, she found a metal ladder fixed to the pipe's wall, climbed up, and with the help of a passerby who heard her cries, she managed to push open the heavy manhole cover.
That's incredible. It's like a scene from a horror movie, but with a miraculous ending.
You'd think so, but the story takes another dark turn. When Maria reported the attack, the police completely dismissed her, either due to her lack of documentation or their own negligence.
What?
They pressured her into signing a statement claiming it was an accident.
Are you serious? They just let him go after she identified him, after all she went through.
It's a shocking failure of the system. And tragically, because they didn't believe her, Pichushkin was free to continue his spree, claiming dozens more lives.
This is exactly why survivor stories are so important. They highlight not only individual resilience, but also the systemic issues that can allow predators to continue harming others.
Exactly. And in the face of that, Maria's story underscores the importance of speaking out, even when it feels like no one is listening.
So did Pichushkin ever face justice for what he did to Maria and his other victims?
He did, but not until 2006. He was finally caught and convicted of 49 murders and 3 attempted murders, though he bragged about killing 60 people, wanting credit for every square on his imaginary chessboard.
It's chilling that he was so fixated on this macabre game, that he wanted recognition for each life he took.
It speaks to a complete lack of empathy, a deep-seated depravity. Thankfully, he was sentenced to life in prison with the first 15 years in solitary confinement.
And Maria, how did she move forward after such a horrifying ordeal?
She showed incredible strength. She gave birth to a healthy baby but had to give the child up for adoption. And in 2006, she bravely testified against Petrushkin, confronting him directly in court.
Wow, that took immense courage to not only survive, but to confront her attacker and help bring him to justice. That's truly inspiring.
It really is. Maria's story is a testament to the human spirit's resilience, a reminder that even in the darkest circumstances, hope and resilience can prevail.
It's a heavy story, but ultimately empowering. And it makes me think about the other survivor story we're discussing today, Sarah Brady's encounter with a woman who tried to steal her baby.
This one is equally gripping. Sarah was 9 months pregnant when she found herself in a terrifying situation that could have had a very different outcome.
Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat already. Tell me everything.
Let me set the scene. Sarah, 9 months pregnant and eagerly awaiting her baby's arrival, gets a call from a woman named Sarah Brady who claims she accidentally received a package from Sarah's baby registry.
Similar names. A baby registry mix-up. This already sounds like the plot of a psychological thriller.
Right. It seems innocent enough at first. They arrange to meet, and Sarah goes to the woman's basement apartment to pick up the package.
Basements again. I'm telling you, they're never a good sign in these stories. Did she go alone?
She did, even though her fiancé had a bad feeling and urged her not to go with Sarah. Sarah, being the kind and trusting person, she was dismissed his concerns, thinking he was being overly cautious.
I understand that. Sometimes you just can't shake that feeling that something's off, even if you can't explain why.
Exactly. It's that gut instinct that we often ignore, but in Sarah's case, those red flags turned out to be very real.
Okay, I'm hooked. What happened at the apartment?
Well, as soon as Sarah arrived for that second meeting, she felt this shift in the atmosphere. The woman seemed agitated, and there were these unsettling details that Sarah couldn't ignore.
Give me the details. What kind of details are we talking about?
For one thing, Sarah Brady kept trying to prolong the conversation, which made Sarah uncomfortable. Then, walking through the apartment, Sarah saw a framed magazine cover with all the faces scratched out.
Okay, that's definitely creepy. We're talking serial killer vibes here.
Right. And then she saw paperwork with the name Katie Smith on it. So now Sarah's thinking, wait, who is this woman really?
Oh no, the alarm bells should be ringing loud and clear at this point.
They were. Sarah tried to leave, but Sarah Brody insisted on a hug goodbye.
A forced hug. That's never a good sign. What happened next?
As they pulled away from the hug, the woman whose real name was indeed Katie Smith suddenly screamed, claiming she was in labor.
Wait, she was faking labor pains.
Yes, it was all an act. And then her whole demeanor changed. Her face, Sarah said, transformed into something sinister, and she lunged at Sarah with a large kitchen knife.
This is terrifying. What did Sarah do?
It was a brutal attack. Sarah, instinctively protecting herself and her unborn child, raised her hand to block the knife getting badly cut in the process. Then a struggle ensued.
So at 9 months pregnant, she's fighting for her life against this knife-wielding attacker. This is unbelievable.
It really shows the power of adrenaline and the fierce protectiveness of a mother. They wrestled over the knife, knocking over furniture, crashing into walls. Sarah managed to break free and run for the building's front door.
She almost made it out. Come on, Sarah.
She did, but just as she was about to unlock the door, Katie caught up to her, grabbed her hair, and dragged her kicking and screaming back down to that basement apartment.
No. Did anyone in the building hear her screams?
Tragically, no one intervened. Sarah was dragged back into that apartment knowing she had to fight with everything she had to survive.
The terror and desperation she must have felt, it's hard to even imagine.
It really is. Back in the apartment, the struggle continued. They fought fiercely until finally Sarah managed to grab the knife.
She stabbed her.
Yes. In a desperate act of self-defense, Sarah stabbed Katie 3 times. Staggering and covered in blood, she somehow made it back upstairs and out of the building, collapsing on the sidewalk across the street.
I can't believe she survived that.
Yeah.
What happened after that?
The police arrived to find Sarah bleeding and traumatized, and Katie Smith dead in her basement apartment. Initially, they suspected Sarah of murder, accusing her of killing a pregnant woman.
Wait, they thought Sarah was the murderer. Didn't they believe her story?
Not at first, but as they investigated the scene, the truth started to unravel. They discovered that Katie wasn't actually pregnant. She'd been using a fake belly and had created this elaborate ruse to convince everyone she was expecting twins.
Oh my God, so she was planning to steal Sarah's baby.
That was the horrifying realization. The police found a hidden obstetrics kit complete with surgical scissors and gloves, indicating that Katie intended to cut Sarah's baby out of her womb.
That's just pure evil.
It's a chilling reminder of the depths of human depravity. Thankfully, the police eventually pieced together Katie's plan and realized Sarah had acted in self-defense. She was cleared of all charges.
Thank goodness. But can you imagine the emotional and psychological toll this experience must have taken on her?
It's unimaginable, Sarah. Despite the trauma, gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She later spoke about how the attack profoundly changed her understanding of motherhood, saying she now knew the lengths she would go to protect her child.
That's incredibly powerful. To go through something so horrific and emerge with even stronger resolve and love for your child, it's awe-inspiring.
Her story speaks volumes about the strength of the human spirit, particularly the fierce and unwavering love of a mother for her child.
Both of these stories are so intense, it's a lot to process.
It is, and they both highlight the common thread of survival against seemingly insurmountable odds. The resilience and strength these women demonstrated is remarkable.
They're truly inspiring figures. It makes you think about your own capacity for courage in the face of danger.
It does. It makes you question what you would do, what lengths you would go to protect yourself or someone you love.
Heavy questions for sure, and ones that I think are worth pondering.
Welcome back to our deep dive into my favorite murder. I'm still thinking about Sarah Brady's story. The fact that she survived that attack while 9 months pregnant and then went on to raise her daughter, it's truly remarkable.
It really is. Talk about a mama bear protecting her cub. You know what I find incredible is that the police initially tried to pin the murder on Sarah. Can you believe that?
It's a stark reminder of how quickly judgments can be made, especially in such a shocking and unusual case. Thankfully, they uncovered the truth and Sarah was exonerated.
It highlights the importance of thorough investigation and honestly not jumping to conclusions, especially when a pregnant woman says someone tried to cut her baby out of her.
Absolutely. It underscores the need to listen to survivors, to believe their stories, and to conduct a complete investigation before assigning blame.
And speaking of believing survivors, Karen and Georgia mentioned in this episode that they received some criticism for telling Sarah's story. Some listeners felt that because Sarah ultimately killed her attacker, it somehow invalidated her experience as a victim.
That's such an interesting point. It raises questions about how we define victimhood and whether there's room for nuance in these situations.
I agree. Does Sarah defending herself, fighting back with lethal force, diminish her trauma or make her less deserving of empathy?
It's a complex issue. It speaks to the reality of survival, the choices people are sometimes forced to make in extreme situations.
It's a reminder that these situations aren't always black and white.
Right.
It's not always a clear-cut case of a helpless victim and an evil attacker. Sometimes those lines are blurred and survivors are forced to make incredibly difficult decisions.
Yes, and in Sarah's case, she chose to fight back to protect herself and her unborn child, even if it meant taking a life. That's a heavy burden to carry, but it also demonstrates her incredible strength and determination.
Absolutely. While we celebrate her survival, it's important to acknowledge the profound impact this traumatic event must have had on her life.
Without a doubt, she carried the weight of that experience even though her actions were justified. It's a reminder that survival often comes with a cost.
Okay, after unpacking those two intense stories, I think we need a little mood booster. What do you say we dive into some behind-the-scenes podcast lore?
You mean like the fact that this episode was recorded in Karen's apartment?
Exactly. I love those little glimpses into the early days of the podcast. Can you picture it, Karen? On the love seat, Georgia, perched on the couch. Stephen Ray Morris, their sound engineer, content as can be on the floor, all recording this episode that would become a phenomenon.
It's such a contrast to the massive operation My Favorite Murder is today. To think it all began in someone's living room, it speaks to their authenticity and the power of organic growth.
And speaking of organic growth, let's not forget that the term murderino came from a listener. It wasn't a marketing strategy or some branding ploy. It emerged directly from the community, reflecting their shared passion for true crime and connection to the show.
It's a perfect example of how a fandom can shape a podcast's identity. The Murderinos are more than just listeners. They're active participants. They create fan art, they go to live shows, and they engage in discussions that extend far beyond the podcast itself.
And who could forget that iconic catchphrase, stay sexy and don't get murdered? It's become synonymous with the podcast, printed on everything from t-shirts to coffee mugs.
It's such a simple phrase, but it perfectly encapsulates their unique blend of humor and their underlying message of empowerment.
I agree. It's like a playful reminder to stay aware of your surroundings, take care of yourself, and most importantly, to keep your sense of humor even when discussing dark subjects.
It's a brilliant combination of practicality and lightheartedness. It's like they're saying, Yes, the world can be a scary place, but let's not let fear control us. Stay informed, be cautious, and don't lose your sense of fun.
I love that. You know what else is fantastic? This episode features the very first listener-created gift they received on the show.
You mean that awesome poster of Elvis the cat riding the owl from the staircase?
Yes. It's a piece of my favorite murder history. Imagine being that listener, creating something so unique and personal, and then having Karen and Georgia rave about it on the podcast.
It shows the genuine connection they have with their listeners. They've cultivated this space where fans feel comfortable expressing their creativity and sharing their love for the show. It's a true community.
And it's so cool that the artist Caroline Abernathy is still selling that poster in her Etsy shop. Anime Gravy. She's a true OG murderino.
It's become a collector's item. It's a testament to the impact of that early fan art and the enduring appeal of My Favorite Murder.
And while we're talking about the early days, can we take a moment to appreciate Stephen Ray Morris, their sound engineer who joined them for this episode?
He's a legend in the My Favorite Murder universe. He stepped in after some technical difficulties and became such an important part of the show's production.
And I love that he was just happy to be there sitting on the floor in Karen's apartment laughing along with them. It shows the camaraderie and genuine affection behind the scenes.
Absolutely. His presence adds another layer to the podcast's charm. He's like that quiet observer, the supportive friend who's always there to help and share a laugh.
Okay, I think we've covered every fascinating detail from this episode. We've gone from the depths of despair with those incredible survival stories to the lighthearted fun of podcast history.
It's been quite the journey. It's amazing how Karen and Georgia blend these seemingly disparate elements, true crime humor, personal anecdotes, and fan interactions into a truly captivating listening experience.
They've created something special. I think we all deserve a virtual high five for making it through this emotional roller coaster of a deep dive.
Agreed. But before we move on, I have one final thought-provoking question for you to consider.
I love a good brain teaser. Get me with it.
Both Maria and Sarah faced unimaginable horrors, yet they found the strength not only to survive, but to thrive. It makes me wonder, what is it about the human spirit that allows us to overcome such adversity?
That is a deep question, and it's one we might want to explore further as we continue our journey through the world of My Favorite Murder and the psychology of survival.
Exactly, and perhaps it's a question we can all ponder in our own lives. What inner resources do we have that can help us face challenges and emerge stronger on the other side?
I love it. So you're telling me that even when we're engrossed in true crime, there are still valuable life lessons to be learned.
Absolutely. My Favorite Murder isn't just about the gruesome details or the whodunit aspect. It's about exploring the human condition in all its complexity and recognizing the strength and resilience that exists within each of us.
Okay, I'm ready for a change of pace. What else can we unearth in this deep dive? All right, so welcome back to our final part of this deep dive into My Favorite Murder.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground, from the podcast's humble beginnings, those harrowing survivor stories, and even some, fun behind-the-scenes trivia.
Yeah.
It's been quite a ride.
It really has. And one thing that I keep thinking about is the power of storytelling.
Yeah.
Whether it's Karen and Georgia recounting a historical crime or a survivor sharing their experience, or even just, those casual chats about Elvis the cat.
Yeah.
There's something about the way they weave these narratives together that keeps us coming back for more.
Totally. I completely agree. They've mastered this balance of, humor and seriousness.
Yeah.
Creating this space where we could discuss dark topics without feeling overwhelmed or desensitized.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance, and they handle it beautifully. I think part of their success comes from their willingness to be vulnerable, to share their own anxieties and quirks.
Yeah.
It makes them incredibly relatable, even when discussing gruesome murders.
Yeah, you're right. It feels like they're inviting us into their living room for a chat, even though millions of people are listening.
It's that intimacy that sets them apart. They've managed to maintain that personal touch, even as their fame has exploded.
And I think that personal touch is a big part of why the Murderino community is so strong. It's not just about the true crime, It's about the shared experience, the humor, the catharsis, and feeling like you belong to something bigger than yourself.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that even in the darkest corners of human experience, we can find connection, support, and even humor.
Yeah, so well said. I think it's time to address the elephant in the room, or rather the owl on the poster.
Yes. The infamous owl theory from the Staircase documentary.
Yes.
It sparked endless debate amongst true crime fans.
Endless. For anyone who hasn't seen it, the owl theory suggests that Kathleen Peterson, whose death was the central mystery in the Staircase, was actually killed by an owl attack.
Oh, wow.
not by her husband, Michael Peterson, who was convicted of her murder.
That's a wild theory. And while there's no conclusive evidence, the circumstantial evidence, things like the lacerations on Kathleen's scalp and the owl feathers found at the scene, have really captured the imaginations of many murderinos.
Right. And even though Karen in Georgia hasn't fully committed to the owl theory, they've definitely acknowledged it and entertained the possibility.
It shows their open-mindedness. They're not afraid to explore alternative theories, to question official narratives, and to encourage their listeners to think critically.
Yeah, that's what makes this podcast so engaging. It's not just about repeating facts.
Right.
It's about encouraging discussion, debate, and healthy skepticism.
And that's what makes true crime so fascinating.
Yeah.
It forces us to confront the complexities of human behavior, the fallibility of memory, and the limitations of our justice system.
It's a reminder that there's always more to the story than meets the eye. Sometimes even the most straightforward cases have hidden depths and unanswered questions.
That's a great point, and I think it leads perfectly into Karen and George's catchphrase, stay sexy and don't get murdered.
Right. Yes. It's such a catchy phrase, but it's more than just a funny saying. It encapsulates this idea of being aware, taking care of yourself,
Yeah.
and not being afraid to approach life with a little humor,
Right.
even when things get dark.
I think it also speaks to their larger message of empowerment.
Yeah.
They're encouraging their listeners, especially women, to be informed, to trust their instincts, and to take charge of their own safety.
Exactly. And it's been incredible to see how that message has resonated with millions of people worldwide. They've created this supportive community, this safe space where people can discuss these often taboo topics, learn from each other, and find strength in shared experiences.
It's truly inspiring, and I think that's the perfect note to end our deep dive on.
Yeah.
We've explored the captivating world of My Favorite Murder, learned from incredible stories of survival, and pondered the mysteries that continue to fascinate true crime fans everywhere.
It's been a truly insightful journey.
Yeah.
And as Karen and Georgia would say, stay sexy, don't get murdered, and always stay curious.